Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel. I'm so very glad you've joined me this evening. I've got a wonderful story for you that I know that you're really going to love. And it's a story about a policeman who does an investigation at a house in Paxton Ridge in West Virginia. And that's where he has his Bigfoot encounter. So let's get started. I know you're going to love the story. Dear Sarah and all your listeners, I'm a policeman who has never come forward about my Bigfoot encounter, but with people writing to you with the assurance of discretion, I thought this would be my moment to come clean about my encounter with the hairy man. I do appreciate this promise of confidentiality on your part, because in my profession, believing in such a thing like a Sasquatch would likely cause me to become a laughingstock among my colleagues, and most certainly have my credibility undermined as a police officer. My Bigfoot encounter happened at a property near Paxton Ridge, Walton Rowan County in West Virginia. I got a call out to this beautiful farmhouse that was situated on 450 acres of rural land. It was a spectacular property if I ever saw one. It was truly a dreamy place to behold, with stunning views overlooking gloriously green rolling hills, meadows and stunning valleys, complemented by natural wooded areas of thriving forest. This was an ideal habitat for natural wildlife such as wild-tailed deer, grouse, turkey and other small game, with of course the inevitable water sources of beautiful streams and ponds that really are quite breathtaking to look at in this part of the world. I arrived at the farmhouse to be greeted by the young farmer who called himself Will, and he was in a terrible state about the large quantities of animal feed that were vanishing from his storage barn. He took me to the barn, which was locked, but something or someone had literally opened the barn, almost as if it was a can of sardines, because the roof had been mysteriously pulled apart, and the area around the barn was strewn with roof rafters and other fallen debris. "When did this happen?" I asked the farmer. "Last night," he said. "Surely," I said, "you must have heard something, like your dogs barking and your horses whinnying. This kind of chaos must have made a raucous noise." I have hearing aids," said the farmer. "I'm actually quite deaf without them. Last night I took them off before I went to bed. When I was asleep, I usually rely on my wife to wake me up if there's any kind of commotion on the property. She's a light sleeper, you see." "Are you saying that your wife heard nothing?" I asked. "Oh, she's not here," said the farmer. "She's in Tuscany for a 2-week course learning how to cook authentic Italian." I knew from what the farmer was telling me that last night on his farm must have been a noisy affair, and he was sound asleep through the whole ordeal. What was more extraordinary was why a whole roof had been torn apart so savagely just to steal a few bags of animal feed. The whole thing seemed extremely bizarre. What was more crazy than anything else was how the roof rafters had been torn away from the roof so violently, in a way that seemed almost humanly impossible. But who or what could have done this amount of damage, I wondered. "Look, sir," I said, "while your wife is away, I would strongly advise you to sleep with your hearing aids in, so that you can be alerted by your dogs if someone is on your property." He agreed. I searched the area around the barn and took some photographs, and I cannot say I saw any signs to indicate who the intruder was. "I'm on night shift tonight, so call me out here, if there's any strange activity on your farm," I said. That night appeared to be uneventful for me until I got a call from Will, the farmer, whom I'd seen earlier in the day, and it was at 11 p.m. at night. This time the young farmer sounded terrified on the phone. "The intruder's here. The dogs are making a huge commotion, and there are these loud crashing sounds. I went out, officer, to see what was going on. There was this huge monster standing on my barn roof, and he was tearing that roof up in his hands into shreds like it was nothing. You see, officer, I placed the animal feed in there this morning, and that animal, whatever that creature is, he must have smelt it. That's why he's breaking open into the other barn now." "Did you shoot at the intruder with some warning shots?" I asked him. "No, of course I did not," said the voice. "Get here, officer. Come here at once. There is no way that I can deal with this thing on my own. And I do think you should bring backup. This creature is highly dangerous and volatile, I imagine." I was puzzled. What on earth was going on at Will's farm? And who was it tearing the barn roof off with such a brutal force? It seemed so over the top to me, but I knew that whatever this thing was, it had to be dangerous. I called my fellow police officer Ryan to come with me to the property, and when we arrived I could hear dogs barking and huge crashing sounds everywhere. It was dark, but luckily with a full moon we could see clearly, and the outside lights of the barn provided a clear lighting for us. So armed with our police rifles, we ran to the scene, and we saw a massive creature standing on the roof, carrying 2 weighty bags of feed on his shoulders. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. The creature looked like something out of a monster movie and had no place in our reality. He was hideous to look at and was so gargantuan I could hardly believe what my eyes were seeing. "What the heck is that?" came Ryan's horrified voice. The creature was bipedal. That was as clear as day. At a guess, I'd say he was over 1,000 pounds and over 11 foot tall, and his chest and torso must have measured at least 8 feet across. I know that sounds incredulous to believe, but that is the God's honest truth. The creature had humanoid and ape-like characteristics, with a large head that was shaped like a cone and telltale long arms that are typical of the ape species. Only these arms were gargantuan. Everything about this creature was larger than life, and one could see at a glance that he had great power and superhuman strength. He was covered from head to toe with dark auburn hair, apart from his facial area, which I noticed had a skin of a pinkish hue. The face was crinkled and thickly textured with deep furrows on the forehead. The creature had a flattened, squashed nose that reminded me of a pug dog. But the worst thing of all were those brown, predatory eyes that terrified me beyond words. The creature surveyed us, gazing up at him on the rooftop and aiming our rifles at him. He looked at us with eyes filled with fury, rage, and revenge, and he let out the hugest scream that was so terrifying that I shat my pants. When he screamed, he sounded like a woman being murdered. It was a sound so horrendous that it caused my whole body to spasm. I could see Ryan staring up at the beast with an expression of heightened terror on his face. We fired some shots at the creature, and he literally jumped from the scaffolding on the roof and landed on the ground with the 2 large feed bags balancing across his shoulders. The way he landed was so smooth and fluid, like a cat jumping off a kitchen surface to the floor. The creature lunged at me and threw me across the ground, where I went flying through the air and landed on several piles of stacked hay. The only thing wounded was my pride, but that was because the hay had softened my fall. I dread to think what the outcome would have been without that haystack. We watched the creature tearing over the valleys on an uphill stance, and he literally glided over those fields into the woods with unbelievable grace for a creature of such massive size. We fired warning shots after him and then followed him into the woods, calling for immediate backup from the police force. As we ventured into the woods, all was eerily quiet. You could literally hear a pin drop, and there were no signs of animal life or any nightly chorus from the crickets. I suddenly knew the creature was close by. I could hear his heavy breathing and feel the eyes staring at me. However, in the dark woods with only torches for light, it was incredible, and it was too difficult to see clearly, making us feel all the more vulnerable and exposed. Ryan and I still aimed up our rifles from side to side, just waiting for the predator to suddenly leap out at us. As you can imagine, we were stricken with terror, and our whole bodies were shaking and convulsing with nerves and adrenaline. Suddenly we saw the dark, shadowy form of the creature running backwards in the woods like a train on full throttle. I mean, who can run backwards at such a speed? It was extraordinary. All the time its eyes were watching our rifles as it dived into the undergrowth and finally vanished from our sight. When the police backup did arrive, the creature had already long since vanished, and there were no traces of him to be seen. Ryan and I told the force that a bear attack had caused all this chaos. The officers seemed puzzled by the carnage caused by the bears. I overheard one officer say, "Bears cannot get up on a roof and cause damage like this. It's not possible for them to physically do this. They are clearly lying to us." The other officer replied, "You bet they're lying through their teeth. I wonder what really happened." Ryan and I never flinched. We were not going to change our story. We had come to the conclusion that a very clever, nasty Sasquatch had terrorized us, but we were not going to tell anyone about this, because I assure you, they would never have believed us. Yes, they knew we were lying. Who cares about that? But telling them the truth would have made us look ridiculous. As for Will the farmer, he was so terrified of the events on his land that he hired a security guard to guard his barns at night, but days later only a single hand belonged to the guard was found dangling on the barn door. I think it was the creature telling the farmer who was boss. Sadly, Will ended up selling his land and buying a farm in North Carolina, and I hope he has never had to go through what he went through again, because it put the fear of God in him as it did for us. Ryan and I attended trauma counseling together, and now we have come to terms with what we experienced on that horrendous night, when our understanding of reality was permanently shifted. I hope your readers found my story interesting, and I hope other people hiding their Sasquatch encounters for fear of being ridiculed will come forward and tell their story. But believe me, it's a courageous thing to do. But with the assurance of remaining anonymous, what have we got to lose? That is the way I see it. Fond regards, Harry. Harry, I want to just thank you so very much for such a fabulous and fascinating story. It is true that you do get some very dangerous Sasquatch. It's extraordinary the kind of encounters that people have had. There are people who've had wonderful encounters with these hairy creatures, people who've had horrifying encounters with them, and this certainly was the latter. I mean, this creature was clearly terrifying. I think that thing that absolutely amazed me about your story was the way the creature was just so incredibly strong, the way he was pulling up these rafters from the roof as if they were nothing. And, that would take several men to just pull out a single rafter, and he's tearing it out as if it's nothing. But clearly these creatures are extraordinarily strong. And I would say that he was a hefty fella at 1,000 pounds, I imagine. So he was a big creature. Yeah, I would have been terrified of him. So I can understand why the farmer moved away. That was a wise thing for him to do, because you never know, that creature could have returned. And maybe there are other stories that other people had with this creature. I shouldn't wonder. Anyway, I hope you guys will subscribe to my channel. Until next time, goodbye and good night.